I still enjoy more than anything else we do because it's a celebration of something really important to what the Bush School stands for. Not just volunteerism, but service in general. I had the opportunity this Tuesday night to be in Washington, D.C. to kick off the 25th anniversary celebration of the Bush School, and heard people celebrate President George H.W. Bush and his civility and his form of respectful and respected governance and his commitment to people and paying attention to all of them. And these were people like Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Mike McCall and Jeb Bush, and it was a phenomenal event. And then to get to come back here and be part of this event and talk about volunteerism and serving your fellow citizens in this way with people who do that full-time is just a real blessing for me. So thanks for letting me join you. I'm also really honored every day to go to work with Will Brown and Kenny Taylor and the whole gang from the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Bush School. And all of us are very honored to be associated in any way with Bank of America. And Rick, to you and your entire team, congratulations on 20 years of this program celebrating volunteerism. It's just really, really a wonderful thing. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. To kick us off this evening, I have the really kind of unenviable task of introducing somebody you all already know. Mr. Neil Bush is a resident of this great city. He is also a public servant. Somebody asked me one time if I thought the Bush family business had been politics and would always be politics, and I corrected him and said, actually, the Bush family business is public service. There is a difference. And Neil, I think, exhibits that daily. He's been involved in a number of nonprofit organizations, as you know. His business interests have been everything from medical services to healthcare to tech to agriculture, I believe, at one point in time. But he has always been a part of nonprofits and service organizations, everything from the Barbara Bush Youth and Literacy Foundation, of course, to the Bush-China-U.S. Relations Foundation that he chairs, to our own Bush School Advisory Board, and a number of other things that he's been involved in through the course of his professional and personal life. And so there's nobody better to kick off an event on volunteerism than this guy. Neil, thank you very much for being here.
One of the greatest or highest honors of my life is to serve on as the chairman of the advisory board of the Bush School. I serve with our moderator, Charlene, who's going to entertain you tonight with her questioning of our special guests. And I think I can speak on behalf of our advisory board in saying that the Bush School is blessed to have outstanding leadership. Mark Welsh has come into this role and has embraced it. He not only shares and believes in the ethos of George H.W. Bush, but his leadership style and everything he does for the school is a reflection of those values. And we are so deeply, deeply honored and pleased, Mark, with your service. So thank you. I'd like to give him applause for that because he's really amazing. My father chose Texas A&M as the site for his library, for the museum, and for the Bush School because of a set of shared values. You know, the Texas A&M values of loyalty, integrity, excellence, leadership, respect, and selfless service. And my father, to his core, believed that service is a noble calling. And since the founding 25 years ago, the Bush School has fulfilled the highest expectations he could have ever had of taking young leaders who cared about rolling up their sleeves and being active in service in government or in nonprofit service. And he would be smiling. He is smiling down on us today, knowing that the Bush School sends a higher percentage by far of its graduates into service jobs than any other school of its kind in the United States. That we are effectively teaching students, young leaders, how to lead and to be leaders in communities, in government, and in nonprofit roles. And the staff, the administrative staff and the teachers and professors are doing a fabulous job at the Bush School. One of the programmatic jewels of the Bush School is the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy, run so ably by Will Brown, and I know this because I also serve on his advisory board. I chair, among the things I do charitably, I chair the Points of Light, and Points of Light is kind of a sister organization in that we encourage volunteerism and support for nonprofit activity in communities all over the United States, and Will does that so fabulously through the center. and you'll learn more about that later. It's my pleasure now to introduce our host for tonight's event, Rick Jaramillo, is the Bank of America market executive for Houston, where he leads the business and philanthropic activities. He's helped to establish Bank of America as one of the most generous and high-impact corporations in this community, setting a pretty high bar for others to follow. But Rick not only directs Bank of America's philanthropic activities and puts energy and assets to work here into philanthropy, but he gives of his own time. And if you read his bio, which is somewhere, I hope, you can see the many organizations that he is a part of and gives his time to, too long for me to list. He is what my father would call a bright point of light. Please welcome our host, Mr. Rick Jaramillo.
Well, thank you, Neil. It's not every day you get introduced by someone from the Bush family. Pretty amazing. Well, thank you so much for the, as I think about today, it's the Masters, it's the Astros opening day, and, this event. Is there any work taking place at any of offices? I'm not sure that is happening. Maybe they're all out volunteering. So first of all, let me do a little housekeeping. Patty Epshire, where are you? Patty, please stand up and just let us thank you. Thank you from Bank of America. Patty handled lots of the logistics from the Bank of America side for us putting this event together. And secondly, I want to recognize all of my Bank of America Merrill colleagues. Will you please just wave and let people know where you are? Thank you. And I want to welcome Jennifer Chandler. Jennifer, will you please just wave at everyone. There's Jennifer Chandler. She is the president of Bank of America in Dallas. She's visiting here. We've got to get her down here to the rodeo. If anybody here could help me with that, we'd be very thankful. She's also head of philanthropic solutions for Bank of America. So, Jennifer, welcome to Houston. I remember, Neil, when we first started hosting these events and very much on campus, and it was just so wonderful when your parents would come out and shake hands with so many of the participants that were there. It was just such a special moment, and everybody just felt the welcome and really drove home the point of how committed they were to volunteerism. I also want to thank Kelly Zuniga, who is not here, Dr. Kelly Zuniga, who is the host tonight, but she was not able to make it tonight, so please, the museum, please give her our thanks. The words of President George H.W. Bush resonate as much today as they did 20 years ago. He said, "We can find meaning and reward by serving some higher purpose than ourselves. A shining purpose, the illumination of 1,000 points of light. We all have something that we can give." And indeed, that still holds true today. My Bank of America colleagues and I are guided by a common purpose to make financial lives better through the power of every connection, just like tonight. We deliver our purpose through a commitment of responsible growth and ESG, environmental social governance. And part of that environmental social governance is our $1.25 billion commitment, additional resources to make life better for all those that are really looking for racial equality and economic opportunity. And much of that is accomplished through volunteerism. I'll give you some examples of how Bank of America is committed to ESG. I remember when we first announced that we were going to pay our colleagues a minimum wage of $20 an hour. Not because some congressman forced us to do it or because somebody forced us to do it. We did it because our CEO, Brian Moynihan, said this is the right thing to do for our colleagues. We recently went to $21 an hour, and we just announced that by 2025, we will pay a minimum wage at Bank of America of $25 an hour. We are also educating women on how to navigate capital landscape by unlocking multiple sources of funding through a partnership with Seneca Women. And we have very intentionally hired 10,000 individuals from low to moderate income communities to become bankers, financial advisors, a world that they thought maybe they could never exist in. We're going to put them through our academy, and we're going to make their dreams come true. Not only that, we achieved that goal 2 years in advance of the goal, and we then committed to another 10,000 hires from low to moderate incomes by 2025. A significant aspect of our work around ESG is about being a great place to work, not just for Bank of America, but for our clients and for our communities. We know that only when our communities have success, only then shall we too have success. So it is important for us to have people that volunteer. And to that commitment, we have, if a colleague volunteers 50 hours, we'll give $500 to the nonprofit of their choice, and when they volunteer an additional 50 hours, we will give another $500 to the nonprofit of their choice. My teammates and I are really committed to skills-based volunteerism, and it can be fun, whether it's serving on a board and bringing your financial skills or bringing your marketing skills, or some of the volunteerism that we recently saw. For example, just yesterday, some of our colleagues were out building homes on Habitat for Humanity Day and building some affordable homes. Also, some of us that are not as skillful at building homes, maybe we can make Christmas cards for children or for seniors so that they too can have a smile on their face. Or our consumer bank yesterday, some of our consumer investment and small business and home loan colleagues came up with not 80, not 100, not 500, but 800 sets of Legos. Legos can be fun. 800 sets of Legos that they delivered to Texas Children's Hospital. Just remarkable. In fact, in 2021, over 71,000 of Bank of America employees volunteered 1.7 million hours. In Houston alone, 45% of our colleagues volunteered at least one time. That's pretty amazing, especially during a pandemic year. And speaking of more, I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege to recognize one of my colleagues in the audience, a shining, bright light. Cully Platt, will you please stand, sir? He's sitting right up at the top where he should. Earlier today, Points of Light organization, anybody here know that organization? Earlier today, Points of Light recognized my friend and colleague, Cully Platt, as a daily point of light. Congratulations, Cully. The award is given to those that tackle society's greatest challenges and build stronger, more vibrant communities through their everyday actions. Not only is he an award-winning volunteer, but he's also a terrific leader of our private bank right here in Houston, an executive that willingly gives up his evenings and weekends to help make our community better. Congratulations, sir. I don't know, sometimes you look up and you wonder, the million lights, which one am I? Well, he knows he's number 7,265. That would be great on your resume. I now have the pleasure of introducing the Director of Center for Nonprofit and Philanthropy at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. Will Brown is also the Mary Julia and George Jordan Professor in the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. He teaches nonprofit management, social innovation, and entrepreneurship, human resource management, and capstone courses. He's a graduate of Northeastern University and earned a master's and a doctorate degree in Claremont Graduate School. His research focuses on nonprofit governance, strategy, organizational effectiveness, and he writes and consults on these topics. Someone I have the great privilege of calling a friend, ladies and gentlemen, Will Brown.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be able to be here. Thank you, Rick. Thank you to the bank. It's been a pleasure to be able to work with Bank of America and Patty and Rick's whole team as we've sort of put this together. I've had the honor to be able to run five of these now that we've had as a part of the center, as a part of the many that's been operated at the school. So it's also a real privilege to be able to be a part of the Bush School. Been there for a little over 15 years. It's a number of excellent folks that I get a chance to be able to work with. And so I just want to acknowledge, I do appreciate Kelly and the staff of the museum and that they've allowed us to be able to be here this evening, and it's really just such a wonderful place. I want to acknowledge a couple of folks that are in the room. So Wynn Rosser serves as another advisory board member for our center, and so I really appreciate Wynn and his guidance for all that we do. So I appreciate acknowledging Wynn. We got faculty members in the room that I do want you to be able to point out too. So I saw Ellie Chu is here, Robbie Robichaud, Angela has been running around doing just about everything this evening, and Dr. Kenny Taylor, I've lost track of him somehow, there he is over there. So amazing faculty that I get a chance to be able to work with. And of course our boss is also here in 2 layers, right? So the department head, Lori Taylor, is here. You'll get a chance to hear from her a little bit at the end, and I'm thrilled to be able to always work with the dean. So it is really a pleasure to be a part of that. Amazing staff. They did all this, helped pull it together, and really make this a wonderful event for us. So I just want to say a few things about the center and say a little bit about volunteerism, and I want to try and get out of the way because we've got an amazing panel, and that's really what you came here to listen to today. I think part of why it's amazing, right? So it's amazing for the people that I get to be able to work with, but I think it's really also amazing because of what we are trying to do at the school. You gave you a little bit of an illustration. A number of our Bush alums are here today, but I hear again and again and again, right, the stories of the people that we kind of work with. So we work with practitioners, we work with students, we work with individuals who want to go out and serve. And it's the best honor. It empowers me every day to be able to think about how do we provide programs that are of value to those individuals that are making our world better every day. And if we listen to what they do, every time I hear it, I think to myself, I am so fortunate to be able to be a little bit a part of the power that those individuals put into play. Example of that, Points of Light, it just is to be able to give people tools to be more effective is really a wonderful thing. And so that's a big part of what we try to do through our research, through our extension work, through our educational programs that we have at the school. And one of our core values of the center is this idea of engagement, right? It's important that people across our communities at all levels and all types are allowed to be able to engage in society. And I think about the reflection, sort of 41's reference. For some reason, it sticks to my brain. I can sort of picture the video, right, where he says, you know, you should just get off that bench and get out there and do something. That's what you should do, right? So it's that image of get out and do something and get engaged with your community, because it's that engagement that helps us feel confident about who we are. We learn who we are and what we become, but we also feel empowered by that connection and that engagement that we can become and make a difference as well. Right? Research demonstrates consistently the value and importance of volunteerism. It's foundational to civic life and to civic society. Volunteerism is a basic expression of human relationships to connect with others. It's our desire to be able to be a part of our society, and it's a basic way for us to be able to do that. The ethos of volunteerism infuses values of solidarity, reciprocity, mutual trust, belonging, and empowerment, all of which contributes to our quality of life. And research suggests that volunteerism helps build more equitable and more stable communities as well. So part of why this is a great event to be able to talk about 20 years later after the gift is given, right, is volunteerism has to continue to think about what does it look like today and what it's going to look like as we go forward. So we're able to be able to sort of celebrate a group here that has amazing volunteer engagement. And we're going to hear about now what do we think about as we start to go forward into the next generation. There's a number of things to be thinking about as well, right? That we're coming out of COVID. We don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen. People were engaging, wanting to engage, but it wasn't quite clear. We are seeing the retirement of the baby boomers to a degree, right? As the Gen X that's been watching the baby boomers for years, it feels like it's been a while. But I'm sorry, I won't go down that path. But the boomers are seeming to sort of take this opportunity as we're Robbie, is to take this opportunity to be able to transition at this point. We're also hearing that the millennials and the Gen Z are potentially, a recent study from the Points of Light suggests that the young generation, young Generation Z is more interested than ever to engage in their communities and through volunteerism. And they're saying, When things come back to normal, which we feel like we're starting to get there, heaven forbid some new COVID variant comes working along, but we won't talk about that tonight at all. So we've got these trends, we've got a great deal of interest, but we've also got increasing pressure on our time, a desire of volunteers for more flexibility, a desire for short-term engagement, hyper-connectedness of our society, what happens online and what that means. Is online volunteering anything like what it means to be in-person volunteering? Has great potential, but also a number of challenges. We're also seeing pressures in regards to what's happening in regards to a desire for skills. People want to make good use of their time and gain skills and capabilities. And it does suggest, perhaps, that there's a role for philanthropy to help blend together that idea of giving of your time and a giving of your money, and thinking about that. I gave Charlene a number of questions, and I came up with a few more. So I'm going to pose these out there, and then I'm going to introduce the panel, right? So thinking about how our volunteer operations are generationally relevant, right? Is what we did 15, 20 years ago the same as what somebody who's coming up now want to be able to do? Do our nonprofits present a multi-aged, a multi-representational community that engages people of all types? Is our culture encouraging generational mixing? Have we got the expertise amongst the people who work with our organization to help engage all types of folks into our organization? So with that, I'm really honored, and we are very privileged to be able to have a wonderful panel here tonight. I think I'll introduce each one of you and then just invite you as a group to be able to come up. We were trying to figure out what the logistics of that would be and what makes the most sense. I'm never going to be able to do them justice, so they do have bios, and I'm not going to read all their whole bios, so I hope that in the program you take a look and see all that they've accomplished. They've done a tremendous amount. And so for tonight, we've got Fred McClure from the class of '76, who serves as the Associate Vice President of Leadership Engagement and with the Office of the President. We were talking about how Fred has seemed to have managed the turbulent waters of the university. We perhaps yet to see all of what what the waves are going to be. I heard talk of working groups and all of these other kinds of conversations for those of you who do pay attention to the university. We have Chris Bowman, who also happens to be of the class of '76 and serves as president and CEO of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And Chris brings a wealth of experience and expertise. 96? Where did I get 76? It didn't make sense to me when I put it down, but I thought, well, you never know. You never know. Thank you. I always need a little help. I should have sent you this before I started talking, and then it would have helped. We all know that in the office, we got to pass our stuff around before we do anything, right? Because inevitably one of us is going to make a mistake. Melinda Mel Gutierrez-Reeves, who doesn't actually happen to be an Aggie as far as I can tell, unless a Longhorn, just to get it out there, just to be clear. So good for you, throw it down. I was going to say that, because it doesn't matter, I'm actually not an Aggie either, so that's okay too. Perfect, beautiful. And you serve as the Chief Volunteer Officer and HR Officer for the rodeo. Melinda is instrumental in working with the staff of 120 plus, I understand. 35,000 volunteers, probably more than that. That number is probably a little outdated. 35,000 is a huge number. They represent an incredible model of volunteerism and engagement, and she has quite a job ahead of her. And then we've got Charlene Wojkowiak, class of '77. Is that one right? Oh, yeah. There we go. There's the classmates. I knew it was there somewhere. Charlene, with that, I think I'm going to give you this panel to be able to have a wonderful conversation and discussion. So I appreciate, and enjoy the conversation.
push the little button. It's very difficult. Sorry, I'm not meaning to turn my back on to you guys, but I'd kind of like to see who I'm talking to. It's weird. This is like the trifecta of moderator land for me because I'm an Aggie, so Texas A&M is near and dear to my heart, as is the Bush School, as is the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So I woke up this morning with a smile on my face and happy to be here. But enough about me. You've already had the bios and you've heard what Will had to add to that. So I thought we'd get started with Will's questions that he was so gracious to provide me, although I'm going to riff on those a little bit. First of all, we'd like to get to know each of you a little better, and we'd like to know your personal experiences and your professional experiences with your own volunteerism. Now, two of you obviously work for the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, so you can count that, but not a whole lot. That's like extra credit. We'd like to know what you have done personally and professionally, or personally and how that has benefited you both personally and professionally. So, Chris, you are the big enchilada of the rodeo food pyramid, so why don't you get us started?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, it's great to be here. There's two places you can say howdy and it really connects. One is at Texas A&M and two is with the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So, howdy. Ah, gosh, just sounds so good. Sounds so good. Thanks, Charlene, for hosting. And I am class of 96, although there are days I've woken up since taking over as president and CEO in the middle of COVID, which I don't recommend, by the way, of the rodeo, and thinking I had aged 20 years. So Mel knows that probably better than anybody. And it's true. I did ask Mel. I went down the hall one day and said, hey, they want us to serve on this panel, and you'd be great. And she said, where do we have to go? I said, oh, it's here in Houston. And so she said, what are we going to talk about? Well, volunteerism. And she said, who to? I said, don't worry about the group. I mean, it's just some Aggies. It'll be just fine. It'll be no problem at all. So, no, I know we don't have a lot of time, so there's my humor to kick us off. I think my first volunteer experience, or the first I ever really learned about what it meant to volunteer, I was probably like 6 or 7 years old. I used to travel a lot with my grandfather. My mom's dad, my grandfather, and my dad are both very influential in my life. Both of them are Aggies. Both of them were professors at A&M, actually. My grandfather was a swine professor, and swine, that's pigs. So, yes, that's what he did. And he used to go around the state, and on Saturday mornings, and he would go to different counties, and he would train 4-H leaders about how to help kids with their barrows, with their gilts, with their swine projects. And so I used to travel with him. I used to go with him. I enjoyed that. And so I would ask him, why did he do this? And, of course, I was 6 years old, so I didn't understand. But in retrospect, what I figured out, and what I do remember him telling me, is I said, I mean, why don't you just do this all the time? And he said, because when you can go train a group of people to do something, they can impact far more people than I can as one. And so that's always kind of been my philosophy growing up, is a train-the-trainer type of approach. When you go into communities and you work with people to make their communities better, because you have some sort of interest or expertise, people always tend to listen. My dad used to always say, if you're from 100 miles away, then you're considered an expert, is what he used to say. And so you'd go into these communities. My dad did that as well, and then I did that the first part of my career. I started as a 4-H agent in Bell County, Texas. So my job was to train leaders so that they could run their 4-H clubs and work with their kids. And so from there, I returned to Texas A&M, where I got the rest of my degrees there, and started as the volunteer management specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, is what it's called now. And that was the group of, those were the folks that had the county agents in the field that worked with volunteers. And so from there, I went and ran the 4-H program. And then I got a call to come to Houston and to work with the volunteers there. So that's my professional background. I've spent a lot of time, done a lot of talks and papers and so forth, talking about volunteer mobilization, volunteer engagement, and so forth. So that's what I'm most passionate about. If I had to narrow it down to one thing, it's really volunteer leadership development and engagement. And so there's the professional side, the personal side. I also, as a part of my career, when I wasn't working directly for the 4-H program, I was a 4-H volunteer. We also work closely with our church. We still have a home in Bryan College Station, so we were very active with the church in Bryan there as board members, and then we also, or I currently serve with the Texas Association of Fairs and Events as their president, which is another volunteer role. And so, look, I believe that when you're passionate about something, it's not volunteering, it's just what you do. And so both my wife and I are very, very involved with different organizations. She is a volunteer at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So I get to hear from her, from the volunteer side of things, which is, that'd be a whole other hour conversation with you all tonight. Before I turn the mic over to somebody else, I do want to ask, how many rodeo volunteers do we have in the house, just so I know? Look, yes! You can't go anywhere without seeing that. It's fantastic. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Mel?
All right, so hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. My volunteer background really started with my parents, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. And so I am the eldest of 4, and they really encouraged us to volunteer in the church, I think, like a lot of families growing up. But it was really part of our family service, and so we were in youth groups and in the church. And to Chris's point, I never thought about it as volunteering. It was just part of something that we did. When I moved into my professional career, my degree is actually in journalism, and so I fell into human resources. That's a whole nother panel, but I fell into human resources and worked for an organization in San Antonio. Many of you may know, many of you may be members. I worked for USAA, and they have a very strong service a kind of philosophy. And as I grew my career there and my HR expertise, one of the things they encourage is board volunteerism, and they leave it up to you, really. And so I started there. I started volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club in San Antonio. But what I learned later in my career when I moved back to Houston, my husband's from Houston, and I have 3 children too, and so if you're a parent, I'm sure a lot of you are parents, volunteer is just what you do, right? I mean, that's what you do as a part of it, and so, you're the one selling hot dogs and you miss the football game. But anyway, so that has always been a part of my personal life, and I've always very much enjoyed it because it's been part of my family. But when I started in the board participation, that is when I really realized what kind of an impact I could have, because some of these smaller nonprofits don't have the resources to have deep HR expertise. And so when I came to Houston, after my family and I had settled, I got called to join a board in San Antonio that actually has businesses here, and it's a micro-lending organization by the name of Lift Fund that serves underserved communities, and what I learned there was that my expertise in HR really had a monumental impact. I've been on that board now for 9 years. Their 10-year terms are actually 6 years, and they extended me for 9 years, and they're talking to me now about yet another round. And it's just because once you have that expertise, and so when I did that, I also joined the Girl Scouts of San Jacinto County. I'm on the board of the Girl Scouts of San Jacinto County. Loved the Girl Scouts, wanted to help empower women, and also so I'm the HR committee chair for the Lift Fund. I'm the HR committee chair for the Girl Scouts, and I'm also the vice chair of the board for the Girl Scouts, and I've been with them 6 years. And so I've just seen how, to Will's point, how your skills, and to Rick's point about how you can bring your skills, and people are so amazingly grateful. Chris is a great boss, but I gotta tell you, these volunteer organizations, they really show so much gratitude for what you do. And so it's a little bit of a selfish endeavor because, you know, you just get such a high out of that. So, so really that's how I became interested. And so when I got, you know, the opportunity to go to work for the rodeo, of course, that felt like a natural fit for the volunteer role.
Thank you. Fred?
It's green. I guess that's what it means. Howdy. It's so good to be here with the Longhorn. In fact, I actually almost was one. And during my entire life as a young man growing up in East Texas and St. Augustine, I had this intention and thought that I wanted to be a doctor. And I had decided that the only place to go was the University of Texas. So a couple of weeks ago, I served at A&M on a review of our music program at A&M, which basically is our winds and the Aggie Band and the singing groups. And the chair was the first woman director of the Longhorn Band. So after I had been around her for about a day, I finally allowed as how I went down and auditioned, and I became a member of the Longhorn Band, had a room in newly opened Jester Center, a roommate, and but I never got the chance to have those little white hats and the little fringy things on my back. So I voluntarily became an Aggie. That was my first volunteering activity that had something to do with academics. I still haven't figured out why I'm a part of this, other than the fact that I have a hard time saying no. And when you have a hard time saying no and people think that you might have something of value to contribute, they will keep bothering you. And then it becomes a question of how you're going to manage your time. I will relate one experience. When I moved to Dallas in '92, I'd been working for President Bush at the White House for 3 years, and I finally decided, you know, I can't take this anymore. You got another year, and I left. And I moved to Dallas, and I became an investment banker. Within the time frame of maybe 4 months, I was on 5 different boards, and it was like, fresh meat is in town, we will take you. One of my most enjoyable ones, though, was I got on the board of the Children's Hospital up in Dallas, much like the one here. And, you know, the first year, I'm just kind of on the board. The next year, there's a committee added. The next year, there's another committee added. And for long, what was just 12 meetings a year became 18 meetings a year or 24 meetings a year. And Lord knows, don't get on the executive committee because that's kind of like the last straw. But it was one of the most, you know, I guess, fulfilling things to do, particularly one night when my kid woke up and I guess he was 7 years old, woke up in the middle of the night saying, I can't breathe, I think I'm gonna die. And so the first thing I thought of, even though there were many hospitals nearby, the one I knew most about was Crosstown. I was on 75 in Dallas, the hospital was on 35, and I put my son in the pickup truck and drove like a bat out of hell across town and drove up into the emergency bay because I knew one thing: as much as I had learned about that facility, I knew what they were going to do and how they could take care of my kid, which at that moment meant a whole lot to me. And those are the kinds of rewards that you get when you understand that the impact that you're having, hopefully, from what service that you decide to do as a volunteer, and knowing what the end product is and how it affects a community. If I were still living in Dallas, and this has happened in occasions since then, when I've not even been living in Dallas, and I've made the big call when kids have been in situations like that, and I've advised families and friends. The other thing, and this is kind of the will thing again, and Mel mentioned it, is where you, pardon me, end up having professional skills that one might think are being brought to the table. And I say that one might think are being brought to the table. I went to law school, so I have a law degree. You wouldn't believe how many boards I have served on where my responsibility has nothing to do with the practice of law, but it gets down to, well, Fred, you're a lawyer, what do you think? This has nothing to do with that. It has all to do with the fact that, what's going to be best for what we're trying to do. I have been a longtime volunteer for the Houston Livestock Show. The reason, Mel, I left the University of Texas and never got there was because I won a Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo scholarship. And it was all about the money. And at the time, I guess we gave 20 back 50 years ago. And I won a scholarship. Then they were $4,000, but that was a full ride, let me tell you. And so it was all the money, and I couldn't. At the time, our scholarships were only given to kids who decided to go to school in Texas, and they had to major in agriculture, which is sort of like our underpinning for the creation of the show many years ago. And so I couldn't go to UT because UT didn't have an ag program. That narrowed it to about 10 schools in Texas at the time, and I chose the one in College Station, and that's why I got this ring on today. So that was the sole purpose, and so I shared that with Paula, who used to be the band director, and she finally came around when I explained to her that I didn't like orange and white anymore. I'll tell you about my first volunteer experience, though, with the Livestock Show. I'll do two, actually. The first one, it was a stupid volunteering thing on my part, but in 1972, 50 years ago, last February, on Rural Youth Day at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, I sang the national anthem. And it was one of these moments where, all the lights are down in the Astrodome and, they're all focused on me. Oh, I shouldn't tell all of this story. They're all focused on me. I'm worried about me not remembering the words because people have forgotten the words in those kinds of circumstances. And it was, I was so happy when I got done singing that song because I knew the words were rolling along behind me. But that was my first volunteer experience at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, a memory that's indelibly inscribed.
What a great one, though. And look at you now, still singing.
And still volunteering. I work for the state.
I happen to know that Fred is the former chairman of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo Scholarship Alumni Committee. So to take off on a comment that Will made about the Gen Z and the different generations as they are coming into the workforce and into the volunteer force and into life, I am curious, as chairman of that committee and as a former scholar yourself, do you see a difference in the volunteer spirit of that particular group? For those of you that don't know, the show gifts a $500, the rest of us mere mortals pay $500, but the show gifts a life membership to every livestock show scholar who graduates. So it's quite a nice benefit. So I'm curious to see how many of those actually come back to serve and what you've observed.
Well, the leadership of the show at that point in time was thinking about how can we reconnect our former scholarship recipients in such a fashion that we kind of accomplish a couple of things. Number one, where are they and what are they doing and who are they now? And number two, how can we do what we can, particularly if they're nearby, that we can reach out and touch them in such a fashion that they will begin to sort of give back and volunteer to do activities associated with the show and rodeo. And that was sort of the guts of it, and I got asked to volunteer and be the original chairman of that committee. And we got together, a group of folks covering several generations, and began trying to come up with activities that we thought, particularly more recent graduates, would be able to participate. Here's the thing that, when I moved to Houston in '81 to start practicing law, First thing I did was volunteer at the livestock show, and I became a member of the speakers committee. And the problem, the challenge that is created is whether or not, and I'll use the word kids when I think of more recent graduates, whether or not the kids were at a point in their professional career where they would have the time to do the volunteer things that they want to do. And that is always, I've found to be a huge issue, particularly for young people. You know, that first couple of three, 4, 5, maybe even 7, 8 years, they're so busy trying to punch their ticket in terms of what they are going to do professionally. And I know that's what happens to young lawyers. I know that's what happens to young investment bankers. It happens to doctors. It happens to school teachers. Take your pick. Most professions, those early years have a great deal of time commitment. So finding out what they'll have time to do and something that turns them on enough that they are willing to try to make some sacrifices is something, a theme that we heard over and over again. And so what we were trying to do is also connect, I won't say baby boomers like me necessarily, but folks who are younger, so that they can help not only navigate whatever professional challenges they might have, but how to balance that with doing volunteer work at an organization or two. And don't throw in marriage, children, all those other things that happen to get in the way when you're trying to get them excited about doing stuff.
Have you, Mel, seen a difference in the attitudes and the willingness, whatever, of new volunteers versus more tenured volunteers, older?
I think so. The experience has been. I know COVID's kind of off the table, but I will let you know that the last couple years it's been difficult to really interact, right? And I think what we're seeing is that the more the older generations are ready to get back to the way they did it, and the newer generations want to do it differently. And I think that's very challenging. I do think Fred's right. I think the newer generations are balancing a lot more. I think they're willing, but they're willing to a point. And I think that is something that we have to solve for. And I think we have to teach across the generations, including the younger generations, how to relate to the older. I think we're always talking about older generations relating to the younger, and we have to do both. And so we are seeing some reluctance there because I think they haven't had the experience, right? So the more traditional generation, the older generations, have had what I would call the experience of knowing exactly how wonderful it can be the way it was. And so the newer generations, I think, are just a little more challenged in trying to figure out what, they're willing to give, but how are you going to help me manage my time and balance what I have to balance? And I think that's something we haven't solved for yet.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, most definitely. And I'll say a couple of things to really, I think, expand on both those topics, or both what the speaker said, because they're exactly right. The reality is, and for those of you that are looking to work in nonprofits and want to work with volunteers, the reality is a lot of young people volunteer with an organization, and we have the research within the rodeo that says it, that when they first come on board, they are there to maybe learn a new skill, meet new people. For a lot of folks, they're new to the community, and so this becomes a small town at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. It's a small community within a very big community. And we have so many different choices of different committees you can be on if you're a salesman, or if you're a great speaker, or you just want to work and not, think, and you'd rather be out doing transportation things and meeting people, whatever the case may be. And so I don't apologize for that. I mean, there's no reason when you're trying to recruit volunteers that it shouldn't be a part of understanding the demographic you're working with, or the age group or whatever, that says, hey, I'm new to the town, my organization wants me to volunteer for something, this looks like a good place, and you can market the fact that you can meet people and kind of build your own small community within a big community. And so a lot of our data suggests that. They get in because they want to learn something about the community, they want to be a part of the community, but they also want to network and get to know people. And I think one of the more interesting things about the rodeo is our volunteers hang out all year round. They do things together. They go to Astro games together. I mean, they're creating their small community. However, over time what happens, the longer a volunteer is with the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, they begin to connect much more directly with the mission. And they stay with the organization because, one, they've done this networking, but now that they are bought into what we're doing, for lack of a better term. And for a lot of them, it's definitely the educational piece. It's the $500 million we've given. It's the great scholars that we have that tell the story that they have. And so they buy into that. And then the ones that have been around the longest really start to connect with the agriculture piece, this whole educating the community about agriculture and food and fiber. And so we all go through our own stages of why we volunteer. Of course, giving back is a general statement that everybody does and says, but when you do the deeper dive of looking at the extrinsic or intrinsic values of why do I want to do this, that's typically what happens. And so they learn the organization as they go through it, and they begin to connect more with it.
I totally agree with that. As a volunteer, the volunteers enjoy every opportunity to connect with our scholars. So as you have opportunities to go to a scholarship dinner, for example, and there's only 700 or so, 800 a year. So, and the rodeo has 35,000 volunteers, so not everybody gets to enjoy the privilege of meeting these kids, but when you do get the opportunity, people are engaged, they're excited. They want to know what these kids are doing. They contact some of the folks that sponsor scholarships, specific scholarships, keep in touch with their kids, provide them with laptops, provide them with other necessities for their college success. So it's really fabulous the way our group just engages and takes care of these kids. But that leads to the next question with all of this going on, with the differences in generations and so forth, a lot of charities, nonprofits have seen declines in volunteerism. The show has not seen that. Would you speak to that, Chris, please?
Yeah, we're a unicorn, I think is the way to put it. It's a very unique organization. And as I said earlier, I spent a lot of time teaching classes in the College of Ag on volunteerism and going across the country, for that matter, on volunteer management. And I used to always talk about the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. That's one of the reasons I came to work here. I wanted to understand what in the world is happening at this place. And I think I just kind of mentioned it. We continue to have more people that want to volunteer than we actually have spots for. And we have grown significantly particularly from about 12 to 15,000 volunteers over the last 15 years. We've exploded up to this 35,000 number, which as we were just talking beforehand, has flatlined a bit, and that's a bit on purpose, where we had some committees that probably had too many, and because of COVID, we've been able to really kind of right-size a lot of the committees to see if we really have the right amount. Because the more you add, the more parking they need, and then the more complaints we get about parking. And so not that any of you have ever had a parking issue at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, thank you. But that's a little bit of a function of growth. Within other organizations, though, there's no question there has been a decline in volunteerism. And when I was running Texas 4-H, we had 30,000 volunteers roughly, and it was a real struggle in urban communities compared to rural communities. And so we had to work specifically in urban communities with partners, whether it be churches or inside schools or whatever, to try to make the connections and try to make kids want to stay after school to do programs. We were much more in a partnership realm because we were just struggling with establishing volunteers in these inner cities specifically. And so in terms of just overall volunteer development, what you're seeing is that people, particularly younger generations, I talked a lot about networking, and the good news is there's so many organizations that, quote, require folks to be involved with different organizations. Some call it voluntold versus volunteer. But there is, that's very important for communities and for organizations to be aligned so that can happen. But a lot of volunteers, a lot of people that volunteer, I should say, you'll hear this term episodic volunteer. They don't mind doing it once, but how committed are they, kind of thing. And so for us, particularly when I was working for Extension with the A&M system, we were pushing hard on episodic volunteers because we knew if we got people to participate once or do one activity or be around a student, not a scholar, but a student in a school, then all of a sudden that connection happens and they stay longer. That's a very different mindset than 20 years ago where people volunteered because it was the right thing to do, if I'm saying that correctly, versus because of the competition of time. Our most valuable commodity we have is time. And time is becoming more and more valuable for all of us. And even though some of us may be working from home now, it's still about time management and all that. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to make sure people understand the value of their time. We spent a lot of time also talking about this is your commitment to an organization. So those are just a couple of examples. The rodeo itself, though, simply just doesn't have that problem. I mean, it just doesn't.
Let me add, can I add something to that? I am so enamored and proud of what the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo does, not only because of the scholarship, but just because of the way the organization works, which is why I am still volunteering. But at one point in time, I served as chairman of the Cotton Bowl. And I can say this publicly, my guy who's president would probably say, Fred, quit telling that tale on me. But I kept mentioning to him, you know, in Houston, you see vehicles all the time that have the logo of the livestock show, where these people are either committed or they're part of a community, a broader community, that has embraced what the livestock show does. And so my line with Rick, my guy, was let's get a program started where when people buy season tickets, we send them out a sticker. And hopefully we will be able to get more people involved the way they do it in Houston. He got so sick of me saying that, the way they do it in Houston. Well, finally, let's see, that was 20 years ago. And about 10 years ago, all of a sudden the stickers appeared. And they're coming, and I love it. I mean, it's just like I get to say I told you so. But there is this embracing of the organization, which is what I'm talking about, by a community. Now, you probably get exposed to that on smaller scales for sure than with 35,000 volunteers. But if you can get community buy-in to what you're trying to promote or support within a local community, that begins to sort of like have a reinforcing effect as you get people who are willing to step forth and, like me, you know, fail to say no and be more part of what's going on. And you have to also deal with the balance, and this goes back to the time and the young people again. You know, there are a lot of boards that you can have the opportunity to serve on, and for $10,000 a year, speaking of the philanthropy part of the equation, or to be able to direct us to $10,000 a year, some of our volunteers don't have that. And we have to think about, they may be bringing something to the table from up here or from here in the heart that gives you something you need, but they might not be able to make the kind of commitment that we're looking for in terms of serving on the board of X to raise money. You know, because it made me feel I didn't have to raise money at Children's Hospital. They had money. My deal was to make sure that we had an organization that met the needs of our community. So you have to balance, I think, those kinds of things when you think about volunteerism, who you recruit, and what the philanthropic tie to it might be.
That's a great point. Folks are downright evangelical about the livestock show, and if you drive around town, you'll see these same type stickers as that Fred was just talking about. My personal vanity license plate says LG Rules, R-U-L-Z. Well, anybody who knows me very well knows that stands for Lamb and Goat Rules. Because I came up through the Lamb and Goat Auction Committee. little plug. So if anybody likes lamb and you want to buy one, let me know. See me after class. No, I'm just kidding. But that is.
You're not
that-
kidding. I mean,
really
you would
not.
sell a lamb right now if you could. Yes, it's all good.
Right. You can let my committee know I'm always plugging for them. But it is true. You just want to get people to buy in, that's for sure. Changing gears just a little bit, although we've kind of touched on it, let's talk about the initiative of diversity. Mel, you're the chief HR person and volunteer. Why don't you talk a little bit about what the show is doing with that initiative?
I mean, I think there's a variety of things that we do from like how people think about diversity. First of all, our scholars truly represent the community. When you look at who gets scholarships, it is very representative of the community. And then what we see, to Fred's point, is we see those scholars returning to the place that gave them that opportunity, right? So that's the first place, I think, where we really have an impact, and we really see that. But one of the things that Chris and I have been working on, especially in this environment that we've all been operating in over the last 2 years, where diversity, equity, inclusion has become so prominent in our lives and in the external environment, one of the things we're talking about is something you just highlighted and talked about, which is how do you really strive to help people feel that they belong and that they belong authentically, that they can show up who they are and they feel belonging, because this is the body of work that I study as a part of my expertise. And what the studies basically tell you is that if you are inclusive, everything else follows. And so you were part of a discussion that we first had about that, right, where we talked to our senior women leaders about how do you help people feel like they belong. But the other thing that Chris and I are very focused on, so for just a very quick little lesson, the thing that I didn't know about the rodeo when I joined is that the organization is very structured. So it's very organized, it's very well organized. Like any organization, you're just a volunteer. So there's 110 committees, each committee has a chairman. That is basically the CEO, and then there's people that report to them. They have little teams. They all get it done, and that is very powerful, right? And so that is part of the belonging. But what Chris and I have been talking about, and many others, is how do we start to build the future pipeline of those leaders, because these are fantastic leadership opportunities. These are things that people may never get a chance to do in their professional lives. Leading a team of 2,500 people, coordinating across, a 24/7 day, taking all skills and types and capacity and capability and figuring that out. And so one of the things we're doing to really build that pipeline and help create the kind of leadership we want with the kind of diversity we'd like to see is we're now putting in we're planning, we're at the beginning of the plans to put in a leadership development program. And that's because this is such a powerful leadership opportunity, and we really want those leaders to have the kind of skills we think are most pertinent inside of this very powerful organization. And I think the one thing I will say, I joined the rodeo about 2.5 years ago. I joined it right before the show that got canceled, so I just went through my first full show. What an amazing experience. And I will tell you that the insight that I got from an HR perspective and a people perspective is that there is nothing like having an organization singularly focused on one powerful goal. And if that's the show, that is why you have this unicorn. Because I will tell you, I didn't really know what to expect. And the adrenaline and the energy is palpable. And it is palpable for 28 days straight. You're exhausted at the end of it, but that is, I think, what makes the magic. And so we have to harness that and figure out how do we create leaders of the future, and we can send them back into the community. They can take it to their churches and to their work, to their workplaces. And so we're literally just at the beginning, and that is it's a long game. But we're very excited about that, and that's part of how we're thinking about how do we create the right pipeline, but also how do we continue, and we're still working on it, how do we continue to create that sense of belonging so that you are attracting people from literally every corner of the community.
I think you've done a great job too of including folks that have been at the show for a long time, that kind of know the ropes, know how to navigate things, and putting them with these younger people or older people that are just new to the rodeo and helping to mentor them and guide them through that process, because it is a huge machine.
Just add a couple of things, because Mel and I do spend a lot of time talking about this topic, and candidly, we're not where we need to be as an organization. We need to be better, particularly as you look at Houston, which is now considered the single most diverse urban community in the country. And so there's lots of new people moving here. And so Mel talked a little bit about internal. I want to add one thing to internal and then talk to you just a second about external, because it all ties together. Whoever made the decision at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo that the leadership that Mel just mentioned, as well as the officers, our vice presidents, not the executive committee, minus the executive committee, they have 3 years to serve, and then they're out. And so that was probably the best decision that the rodeo ever made. And the reason for that is because it forces leadership development internally, but it also allows for new thoughts and new ideas all the time. And so I was just going over the books today. We'll have 31 of the 110 chairmen switching out next year. And so the way it works is the first year, they don't know. They come on and they learn the system. The second year, they normalize. And the third year, they try to create a bunch of new stuff. And then before we let them do that, they have to go. And so everybody has new ideas. But that's not exactly, well, no, it is true. Okay,
No,
so
it
it's
is.
actually true.
It is.
So that's, but it's really good. But then what I worry about, and Mel knows this better than anybody in the room, is a lot of times people roll off of their third year, but they're not done giving. And we've got to do a better job of engaging them, and that's what the leadership program should be about for us as we move forward. And so it's just really important that we capitalize on that leadership even after this. So the good news is we always have fresh ideas. The bad part is we don't want to lose the great leaders that if they're not selected to move up into a very, very few positions that are left in the hierarchy, then they may slide back down, and we want to get them involved in other committees and so forth. Now let me tell you about external, because the number one question you get as president and CEO is who picks the entertainers. And so that is a critically important piece of our portfolio. And so I can tell you that if we had 20 white country acts, even the white country people aren't coming 20 nights in a row. And I say that because for us, that is a way to bring new people to our show. And what we know is if we get first-time visitors, which we average every single year, about 15% of the people that come to our show are new. And so if we get new people to the show, then it's about getting them back. And then if you get them back, then they want to get more involved. And then they see, oh, there's a committee that does art, or there's a committee that does whatever the topic is.
Lambs.
Lambs, yes. I was going to say steer. That'd have been a mistake. And so so now you're pulling because people have that experience. And then coming up, as we said a minute ago, by providing scholarship winners once they graduate, free membership, they also have access to the top of the list to join a committee. And so by doing so, now we're bringing a much more diverse population from the bottom up as we're spreading this out and bringing people in from the outside in. So it is it literally is an everyday Mel and Chris conversation about, okay, how does this work? How can we do better at engaging? One more thing, and then I'll be quiet on this topic, because I get really passionate about it. We have a Black Heritage Committee. That's one of 110 committees, and it's one day of the show. And so the struggle we have there is a lot of African Americans think that's the committee I need to be on. Well, the problem there is there's only one chairman of that committee every 3 years, and then we have these other 109. Same thing for Go Tejano. We need to do a better job, and this is what we're talking about when we talk about inclusion. It's because we know with inclusion, if you're included, you feel a part of it, it will come. We have to do a better job of getting more diversity across all the committees, and that's become a real priority. Lamb and Goat is actually, and Truthful has done a really good job of that. They've made that a high priority. So that's what will happen over time. But it's certainly a huge issue for us, particularly any organization in this community. It needs to be if you're going to be relevant.
Fred, did you want to add something? You look like you were looking at me meaningfully. Maybe I just imagined it.
That I was looking meaningfully?
I want to say
I've
something.
never been accused of that. Come on, Charlene. No, I want to piggyback a little bit. Let me tell you, these 120 folks that Chris leads and that Mel's a part of, they are the most outstanding staff that you can ever think of to have folks who are dedicated to putting on those 28 days every year. They need a round of applause just for that. I think one of the great things about the history of the show is that how it has developed over the years has put it in a position where we are having impacts elsewhere in the community, at churches, at other organizations, because of the types of leaders and leadership experiences that exist in the whole hierarchy in terms of our volunteers. I think what these guys are thinking about doing now, and what we've been doing actually for the last few years, but being intentional about it is, and that's being intentional about the leadership development program and what we're trying to accomplish and who we want to try to attract to be a part of the organization, to be inclusive. And I think that's something that we all have had a chance to reflect upon over the last couple of years, particularly as COVID was unfolding and all the things that happened all across the country. And I think it is time for us to sort of step back and say, can we be intentional about trying to include people as opposed to finding ways to separate ourselves? And so that's a worthwhile goal, and it's one which I highly encourage. You know, one of the problems that I had when I moved to Dallas in '92, I was a new kid on the block. That's why I had 5 boards in the first. I mean, as a practical matter, that's why. Because there was this black guy that came into town who knew something about government, who knew something about leadership, who was willing to say yes if you just asked him, it seemed, and that's how it happened. That's not the way it ought to be. It ought to be different from that. And so whatever we can do in our individual capacities as individuals or as professionals to be able to impact that, I highly encourage you to do so.
Will's given me the high sign here. I think we're out of time, but thank you all very much.
I want to thank everybody for coming this evening to help us celebrate the Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofits. It is a very important part of the Bush School, and following this amazing panel is just absolutely terrifying. The stage fright has kicked in horribly, but I do get to give away presents. So it is my task to provide each of our panelists with a small memento to help them remember this glorious evening. So would everyone please join me in a round of applause as I provide crystal doohickeys to each and every member of the committee. So, Charlene? Melinda? Chris? Thank you. And success without dropping them? Thank you. I'd now like to invite my boss, the Dean, to say a few words, and thank you all so very much for coming.
I've been given very strict instructions on what I'm supposed to do now. I start with thank yous to all of you for being here. First of all, it's just wonderful to share the event with you. Secondly, to Rick and to the entire Bank of America team for being such a wonderful sponsor for a wonderful event for a long period of time and being committed to volunteerism in your community. Third, to the folks of the Center for Nonprofit at the Bush School, to Will and Kenny and everybody else who's here. The whole gang is here. Denise, stand up. Denise Parker was kind of the lead planner for this. Nicole Collier, would you stand up? Denise is magic. Nicole, who's sitting right next to her, is magic. Angela Seaworth is magic. They're just all incredible. And by the way, I'd also like to thank the panelists because more than anything else, not for tonight, you're just inspirational. The example you set for all of us is really, really remarkable. Thank you for that. One of the great things about being at the Bush School of Government and Public Service is we have 360 master's degree students who choose us because they want to serve. Essentially, they want to be you. And so being able to hold you up as examples to them and many of you in this audience is just really kind of a gift to a very broad community, so thank you. And the other thing I'll tell you is in your folders you got tonight, there's some material on the Center for Nonprofits at the Bush School. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about it, please do. I'd also invite all of you to come visit the Bush School if you haven't been there. I'd love to buy you lunch and put you in a room with 5 or 6 of our nonprofit students and Will or Kenny and just let you be blown away by them. They are awesome. And all they want to do is come work with you someday. And so come inspire them with your stories of service. We would love to have you anytime. And maybe my most important comment of the night is the final one. I'd like to let you know that dessert is in the lobby. Please have some and visit for a few minutes before you head home, but do travel safe when you do, and thanks again for joining us.